Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's me and Queen Bee. We listened, you asked, we listened. We have a pet DIY video today. Blondie and Pepsi is actually over there, but she's not getting in the shot because that's cats for you. So I'm gonna get straight into it. We'll have the chats after. I've got two DIYs. First up is how to make Blondie's little collar, and then the next one is how to make the tent. The tent will probably be customized if you want to make it for kids as well. If you're new to our channel, don't forget, you know the drill by now. Hit the sub button, hit the bell, whatever you need to do so you come back. Anyway, let's get into it, and here is the first DIY. So for the first DIY, we are going to be using an old collar as a template, and we are going to make a brand new collar. For Blondie, I'm going to use some scrap fabric for this, and this is really simple to do. The first thing I'm going to do is dismantle the old collar and take all of the pieces off. So this old collar has safety clips, and I'm just going to recycle them, and I'm going to use the old piece of fabric as a template for the new one. So I'm just measuring across and down, and I'm going to add extra fabric. I will put the measurements in the description box if you want to follow along, because I think most of these cat collars, they're kind of the same size. So I will pop the measurements in the description box. I just use my sewing marker, so once you apply water, this will dissolve. So I just measured on the measurements to the fabric directly, and I cut it out. So for this, I simply found the center of my fabric, and I folded both sides inward, which I hope will make sense when you watch what I do. And then I folded it in half again, and this is going to be your strap basically. And I'm going to put 2 stitches all the way around it, which I hope will make sense when you see when I do it. So that is pretty much how you make the strap, and all we are going to do now is assemble it with the pieces that I took off from the old collar. So I am simply threading through my collar. It's kind of hard to explain what I'm doing, so I'm hoping that by watching me doing it, you'll see how I got it. But I threaded it and then I stitched it in place. So as you can see here, I'm threading it through. And then I'm going to fold over the fabric, and I'm going to do a straight stitch to secure it into place. I hope you can kind of get the general idea for what I am doing here. I'm threading it. Don't worry if you don't have an old collar. I have seen people making cat collars, and instead of using clips, they use elastic, and they simply measure the elastic around the cat's neck. I like the idea of the clips and the safety clips because they snap easily so if Blondie gets caught when she's out rambling, the collar simply just snaps off and it causes her no pain. So I do prefer the little clips over the elastic. So I decided I wanted to add a bow to the collar because this is Blondie after all. So I'm going to show you how I just made a simple bow. So I measured out some fabric. I think this is 3 inches in width and length I think is 6 inches. But I will leave the measurements in the description box for you. Once I was happy with the measurements, I then cut this piece out. I then just done a fold, so I ironed it in half and then I ironed the sides inwards. I use my glue gun to pinch it together and form a bow shape, but you could hand stitch. I think I was just done with the hand stitching today. So I use my glue gun and then I use a piece of fabric to stick it to my collar, which you're gonna see now. So once you are happy with your collar, you can then just adjust the measurements and pop it onto your cat. As Blondie goes outdoors, if she was an indoor cat, I probably wouldn't have a collar on her, but because she goes outdoors, I want her to look fabulous and people to know that she is owned and loved. So my second project, I put my woodworking skills to the test and I made Blondie her very own tent. I am using some power tools for this. I'm using my jigsaw, sander and my drill. Don't worry if you don't have these, you could probably use a handsaw. I do recommend a drill for this though, and definitely sanding pads. I loaded up my jigsaw with a fresh blade and I started to measure and cut the wood. So just like the previous project, I will leave the links to all of the measurements in the description box. Also, Blondie thought measuring was time for fun. I then used my jigsaw to cut the wood and I also sanded any rough edges. So when it comes to woodwork, what I've noticed is it's very similar to sewing. If you measure incorrectly, your piece will never work, which is the same as sewing. So measure twice, cut once. To get a perfect round circular hole for my dowels to go through, I use a 20mm drill bit. This was my first time to use something like this, and this gave me that perfect round hole that the dowels would go through. I made sure to measure from the bottom of each piece and I just marked with a pencil where I wanted to drill. I'm just using a scrap piece of wood just to make sure I don't drill through my scaffold board table, because it took me a while to make that table and I'd be really disappointed if I drilled holes in it. So I just use a piece of scrap wood to save my table. If you make one of these tents, make sure that your hole is not too big for the dowel, because I find that they can slip out. I also had to add a hole to the other end, so where you see that I have angled the bottoms, these are the bottom pieces, and I had to add holes to the bottom of them so that my dowel will go through. I hope it makes more sense when you see me assemble it. I also used my sander to make sure that I had sanded any rough edges, because I don't want Blondie to get any injuries off this, and also I know when my niece and nephew come to visit, 100% they will want to play in the tent. Now, as you can see, I am struggling to put this together because the pieces kept popping out and falling down. I did have to get a piece of string. I did see people making these and they used some string to hold it up. In hindsight, I should have put a piece of wood on the back pieces. As you can see, I have a bit of string holding this together at the bottom because it just kept opening on me. But ideally, use a piece of wood at the back. So once I got the seal of approval for what fabric to use by Blondie, I then got to making the actual tent part of this. So I started by measuring the length and then the width. of where I wanted my fabric to go. So I measured from the top dowel to the bottom dowel, and I just added an extra few centimeters for a seam allowance. Pepsi also had to get in this video because it would not be a cat DIY if bug cats were not in it. I cut my fabric and then I brought it to the ironing board, gave it a press, and I started to add some hems. So this is where it might get a bit confusing. I initially made just a normal fabric piece to go over the two sides, but once I had made that, I decided I wanted to put a front and a back on it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just doing a hem on both sides of the fabric tent. I'm then going to do a little pocket on the bottom, which you'll see me do in a second, and that is for the dowel to go through. And that is how you make a simple kind of like side tent. But you'll see that I decided to add extra panels because I wanted it to look like a proper tent and have flaps and everything on the front. So if you just want to make one that the sides just go through, then follow this, and then if you want to add extra, you'll see I'll show you now how I added extra. When I added my fabric, I did have to pop the string back on because it did keep falling down. So I definitely recommend adding an extra piece of wood at the back, and this will stop it falling over. So here is where I probably should have just stopped the project because I added the difficulty level. I decided to put a front and a back on this, which might be hard to explain, but I'm hoping that by watching this you'll understand what I did. So I measured the front to the piece of dowel. So I measured, it was I think 28 inches and then 25 in the center. So I made a triangle, which I will leave in the description box. I also ran out of fabric. So the back piece is beige and the front piece is the same pattern as what I used. So this might look complicated, but if you follow the rule of the patterned sides facing each other, so once your right side of fabrics are facing each other and you stitch them so you don't have a wrong side and a right side together, hope that makes sense, you can't go wrong. I also just added in some little strings so that I could tie them to the wooden base of the tent. So for the front piece, I found the center and I cut up. I didn't cut up all the way. I just cut up and I left a gap at the top and I hemmed the two sides because these are going to give me that cute little tent look that you can like peel back the sides. I really wanted that for this. So I just gave them a straight stitch and I just added a seam on the side. I wanted to hem it and make it look nice and pretty and tidy. So here is where I realised I'd made a little bit of a mistake, but I saved it. So when I assembled my tent, I realised that the top piece, the dowel had to go through. So I just got the scissors and I cut a hole. But when you see this put together, you actually can't see it. I could probably do a little hand stitch around the hole to make it look nice and neat, but you actually can't notice it. So that was my mistake, because I pretty much made this up as I was going along. But I think I nailed it in the end. From both of those DIYs. Obviously there's a million ways you could customize it and make it yourself. If you don't have an old collar to recycle, I know in Deals or Poundland they do a set of 2 collars for €1.50, a black and a white. If you wanted, you could take them apart and use all of the little bits to make your own collar, or just recycle. The cat's collars, I mean, they get messy, they get wrecked. The red one that I used was actually Pepsi's and I had gotten frayed. So I gave Pepsi Blondie's old collar and Blondie got a new collar, but I will make Pepsi a little floral collar. Pepsi's a bit more, Pepsi's not as floral as Blondie. Yeah. Also, if you make the tent, so I was just making the tent. I had looked on Pinterest for a few little kind of patterns to follow on YouTube, and then I just wasn't happy with just leaving it with the 2 side panels. So I hope I explained how I made the front and the back piece. If I'm being totally honest, sometimes you are just in the creative zone and something takes over and you just start making things and then you go, how did I actually make that? Which is kind of what happened with the tent. But basically I just added front and back panels, and I should have added a back piece of wood instead of string. So if you do make this tent, I would add a back piece of wood and maybe reinforce it with a couple of screws if you are going to give it to kids, because I was thinking the first thing my niece and nephew are going to do when they visit is get into that tent, and I wanted to make sure that I was going to be child proof as well as pet proof. So add a back piece of wood, because if you leave the string, I mean Blondie's not going to trip over the string, but if you are making the tent for kids, the string is not really ideal unless they're older, because you're going to trip over it. So just a little tweak. My tent is not perfection, but I think I've made a good stab at it anyway. If you remember, I think I had a vlog last month where I styled a garden party. I showed you that Blondie and Pepsi are so extra that they got gifted their very own cubby house. Well, I finally got around to painting it pink as well. So Maxi Zoo kindly gifted them the cubby house, which is so fabulous. Blondie seems to use it the most. And I also have a hedgehog that is wild and visits, and I do put hedgehog food down the bottom. So I noticed that it's also a hedgehog house as well as a cat cubby house. I will also link to a really old video where I transformed, it's like I got it in TK Maxx, it's a feeding bowl, and I used marble contact paper and copper spray paint to make it fabulous. So I'll put in a cute little picture here, because I know I have a picture of Blondie sitting with it and she looks very cute. It's an old video, but I will pop it in the cards here if you want to check it out. So that's it for my pet DIYs. This is only the first of many pet DIYs, because as I was making this, I was getting loads of ideas. I did buy some washing line from Poundland as well, because I was thinking DIY scratching posts. So keep your eyes peeled. I will definitely do another pet DIYs, because Blondie and Pepsi, they love it. I mean, you just want to spoil your pets, don't you? So that is it for this week. Thumbs up, and I will chat to you all in next week's video. Bye everyone.